Hi, this is Becca Taylor from Gone Chalking. I'm going to show you a fun way to use the February 2019 Club Couture design. It's called Oh Snap. It has the saying Oh Snap and a camera with a little flash decal and little like jazz hand signs. They're not jazz hands, they're just like little lines, but it also comes with this really sweet sentiment that says collect moments, not things. Not too long ago, I got this scrapbook that was really plain, and I was sad that it was really plain because I wanted to find a design that I really liked, but I couldn't anywhere. So I was really excited to see that there was a way I could jazz this up a little bit. The colors that I chose to use are Couture Coral, Bright White, Black Velvet, and Shimmer Silver. Um, I recommend that as you are getting started, you get all your supplies together before actually laying down the transfer and starting your design. I think that just makes the whole process go a lot smoother. So I'm going to take a few seconds here to open each of my ink containers, make sure they're stirred up and the texture is consistent and smooth, so that when it comes time to lay down the transfer and add the ink, everything just goes smoothly. The other thing I wanted to mention here, you'll see that down the middle of my design here, there's a crease in the transfer. If your postal service is anything like my postal service, if an envelope says do not bend, they are going to bend it and they're going to cram it into a box full of other mail so that when it comes out, it is legit pretty much broken in half. So it's a little frustrating sometimes. I understand this, but the good thing is with these designs, with these transfers, even though it looks really creased, once you put it down onto your surface, that crease is going to go away because of the adhesive on the back of the transfer. It's going to lay down smoothly. And then as you continue to use the transfer, you'll notice that that crease is just sort of working its way out of the material. So generally speaking, if your transfer arrives bent in half like this one was, don't worry about it. It is still completely usable. So off camera, I am applying the transfer to a towel to fuzz it up some. So the reason we do this is to make sure that the adhesive on the back of the transfer does not bond to your material too much. This album is kind of a leather surface, so it's very smooth texture. It's not the stippled leather, it's just the flat leather. And so that's why I wanted to make sure that I had plenty of fuzz on this, because the smoother the texture of your surface, the more the adhesive sticks. And when your transfer is full of ink, pulling that up when it's really sticky can get a little messy. And just a note here too, when you're working with the inks, at least I try to be a lot more careful than I am with the chalk, because the ink is designed to be a permanent design, whereas the chalk is meant to be temporary. So if you dribble the ink, it's a lot more likely to stain your project than the chalk is. So I've laid a real thin layer of ink down onto the transfer, and now I'm using the squeegee to scrape away all of the excess. And you can just scrape the squeegee on the side of your jar so that you don't have to waste all of this extra ink. You can put it back into the jar and use for the next project. The other thing that you'll notice too as you start pulling the squeegee across this is that you might see some lines from the edge of the squeegee. And so that's why I'm going over this so many times, is to try to get rid of some of those lines so that when I pull the transfer away, the ink looks really smooth and doesn't have weird creases or lines or anything like that in it. So I'm taking this transfer away to go wash it off. That's the other tip I have for you when you're working with ink. They will stain your transfers, and that is totally okay. But I like for my supplies to look clean, so I try to get them rinsed off as soon as possible. I'm using my heat tool here to dry the ink. I want to make sure that it's at least dry to the touch before I put the next part of the design down. That way the adhesive on the new part of the design doesn't pull the existing design up. And now it's time to add the camera to our design. So I'm going to peel the camera off of its backing and stick it down on a bath towel 2 or 3, 4 times until it's fuzzed up enough. And you'll start to get a feel for what enough is when you're fuzzing the designs. You can also see here at the bottom of the camera piece that it's partially see-through, so you can see where it will or won't overlap with the design that you already have applied to the surface here. So I'm just rubbing this down to make sure that it is well adhered, especially in some of these more intricate designs. I find it's good to go, use your finger and press down a little bit on the intricate parts of the design to make sure that it sticks, because if it doesn't stick, then the ink kind of pushes under the screen, and then it just comes out as a blob and you don't get to see the pretty intricate design that's there. So I'm going to use black ink here again, and as before, just spread it across the entire open mesh of the design, and then scrape away the excess, and you can just deposit what is left over into your ink bin there. And you can see here on the edge, I've gone over the edge of the transfer onto the album a little bit, so I have a wet wipe handy at all times. And because it was still really wet and I hadn't applied any heat, I was able to wipe it up really easily. When you're ready to pull it up, then you just pull the transfer straight up. Don't pull it towards you or roll it over on itself. That's a good way to get your ink on your surface where you don't want it, and also a good way to have the transfer fold in on itself. And sometimes if you get the adhesive side sticking to the adhesive side, it kind of messes with how well it sticks the next time around. And once again, I'm using my heat gun to dry the ink before I go on any further. And I just wanted to show you, so if you're new to using ink or even the chalk, it does the same thing. I want to show you how you know when it's dry. Here on the left is freshly applied ink. It has a little bit of shine or gloss to it. Same with our Chalkology paste. It does the same kind of glossy finish when it's wet. And on the right-hand side, you'll see it gets a real matte finish when it's dried. So when you see the whole design is matte, that's when you know you can continue. So now I'm going to apply the collect moments, not things saying. Once again, I'm just showing you the crease that was in the transfer from the mailing, but you'll see once I lay it down on the surface, it is completely flat. You don't have to worry about it. The other thing that I've noticed as I'm getting ready to apply this next part of the design is up there right under the camera on the top stroke of the S, I see that the adhesive has actually pulled some of the ink up. So what I'm going to do is use those backing sheets as sort of a mask as I'm applying this next part of the transfer, so that I can protect the ink that's already there without damaging the transfer or the surface or the ink. So I just align the transfer the way I want it, and then using the glossy side up of the transfer backing, just slip that under the transfer, of course being sure that I can't see it through the screen, because the screen is the design that needs to lay down. And then once I have those put in place, I'm just working to make sure that all of the little letter areas of the design are adhered enough to the leather that the design will come out all right. And so for this piece, I'm going to use the Couture Coral and just spread a little bit along the transfer and use my squeegee to lay it down and pick up the extra to scrape back into the ink bin. Okay, with the banner saying applied and dried, I'm going to move on to the starburst for the flash area of the camera. I'm going to use the same masking technique with the transfer backing and use the white ink for this starburst. I'll apply the ink, remove the transfer, dry it, and then do the same thing for the starburst lines, which I'll apply at the top left of the design and the bottom right using the shimmer silver ink. I'm going to speed up the rest of the video for the application since I've already shown you the technique I used for the masking. This way you can at least see the placement and everything for the rest of the design. Once all of this ink is dry to the touch, I'm going to take it to my heat press and heat set the ink. Again, the ink is permanent once it's been heat set, so that was one thing I wanted to test with this, was to see if I could use the heat press on the album, and it worked great. I had the heat press set to 300 degrees, and I pressed the design for 15 seconds, let it cool for a second or two, and then pressed it again for 15 seconds. And you know that the ink is set when you can see the texture of your surface through the ink. So you can see here just the small little pebbles and dipples of the leather. You can see that the ink has sort of taken on that same texture. That's when you know it's set. So here is a picture of the final product. I hope you've enjoyed this lesson, and I hope you are able to design an album cover that you enjoy as much as I enjoyed this. Happy crafting!